The cruelest thing about being forgotten is watching someone else take credit for the life you built. I never imagined those words would describe my own family. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 68 years old, and for most of my life, my husband Robert and I dedicated ourselves to building something we believed would outlive us both. 40 years earlier, we started the Whitmore Foundation from a small office above a hardware store in Hartford, Connecticut. Back then, we had little more than determination, a few loyal supporters, and a dream of helping local families and students who needed a chance. Over the decades, that dream grew into one of the most respected charitable organizations in the state. People knew our name. They trusted our work. And for many years, Robert and I stood side by side at every annual charity gala, celebrating what our community had accomplished together. But everything changed after Robert passed away. Losing him felt like losing the compass that had guided my entire life. In the year that followed, I stepped away from public events. I still cared deeply about the foundation, but grief has a way of making crowded rooms feel unbearable. While I quietly focused on healing, my daughter-in-law Vanessa Whitmore stepped into the spotlight. Vanessa was 45 years old, polished, ambitious, and exceptionally skilled at presenting herself to influential people. At first, I was grateful. I believed she genuinely wanted to continue the work Robert and I had begun. She became the face of the foundation, attended every fundraiser, gave interviews, and appeared in countless photographs. The board seemed pleased. Donors seemed impressed. And slowly, almost without anyone noticing, Vanessa became the person everyone associated with the Whitmore name. When the invitation for the annual charity gala arrived, it came much later than usual. For years, I had helped organize the event myself. This time, the envelope appeared in my mailbox only a week before the gala. I tried not to read too much into it. After all, people were busy. Mistakes happened. Still, something about it felt strange. On the evening of the gala, I put on a simple, black evening dress and the pearl necklace Robert had given me on our 25th anniversary. As my car pulled up to the entrance of the historic ballroom, memories flooded back. I could almost hear Robert's laughter echoing through the years. The building looked magnificent. Crystal lights sparkled through the tall windows, and elegant guests filled the entrance. Yet as I stepped inside, something unexpected happened. Several people walked past me without recognition. Others offered polite smiles, but quickly moved on. A few years earlier, many of these same individuals would have crossed the room to greet me. Now it felt as though I had become a distant relative at my own family reunion. Then I saw Vanessa. Her image was displayed on large promotional banners throughout the ballroom. Guests surrounded her wherever she went. She smiled confidently as photographers captured every angle. The event program described her as the visionary leader guiding the foundation into a new era. My name appeared only once in a small paragraph near the back. I stood quietly near one of the marble columns, watching the celebration unfold. No one was openly rude. In many ways, that made it worse. I was not being excluded. I was simply being forgotten. As the evening continued, I noticed more subtle changes. People who once sought my opinion now turned directly to Vanessa. Board members introduced her to major donors as though she alone represented the foundation's success. For the first time in my life, I felt like a guest inside a legacy I had helped create. Then, just as I began wondering whether I should leave early, an older board member named Harold Bennett approached me. He had known Robert and me for nearly 3 decades. His expression was serious as he shook my hand. He glanced across the ballroom toward Vanessa before lowering his voice. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "some people have forgotten who built all of this." Those words settled heavily in my chest. And in that moment, although I didn't know it yet, the most shocking chapter of my family's story was only beginning. Harold's words stayed with me long after he disappeared back into the crowd. Some people have forgotten who built all of this. I wanted to believe he was simply being kind. Perhaps he had noticed how uncomfortable I felt standing alone while guests gathered around Vanessa. But as the evening continued, I began noticing things that were harder and harder to dismiss. The charity gala had always been more than a fundraising event. It was a celebration of the foundation's mission. Every year, we highlighted the programs that changed lives, the scholarships that helped students attend college, and the community projects that Robert and I had spent decades supporting. Yet as I flipped through the event booklet, something felt different. Several scholarship programs I remembered personally establishing were missing entirely. One of them had supported first-generation college students for nearly 20 years. Another helped military families facing financial hardship. Those programs had once been among our proudest accomplishments. Now there was no mention of them anywhere in the printed materials. At first, I assumed the information had simply been condensed to save space. But the more pages I reviewed, the more questions I had. New initiatives filled the booklet instead. They carried impressive names and glossy photographs, yet many seemed unfamiliar to me. That alone was surprising. Even though I had stepped back from public appearances, I still received board summaries and annual reports. I should have recognized these projects. A feeling of unease settled over me. As guests enjoyed dinner, I quietly moved through the ballroom, reading display boards that highlighted the foundation's recent achievements. Several descriptions credited Vanessa with introducing programs that appeared remarkably similar to ideas Robert and I had developed years earlier. The wording had changed, but the concepts were nearly identical. Again, I tried not to jump to conclusions. Organizations evolve. Projects are renamed. Leadership changes. There could be reasonable explanations. Still, the pattern was becoming difficult to ignore. While I stood near one of the presentation displays, a man approached me. I recognized him immediately. His name was Michael Sanders, and he had worked in the Foundation's accounting department for more than 15 years before retiring. Michael had always been careful, professional, and deeply loyal to the organization's mission. His expression seemed unusually tense. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, "it is good to see you." Before I could respond, his eyes shifted toward the opposite side of the ballroom. I followed his gaze and saw Vanessa speaking with several donors. The moment she noticed Michael standing near me, her smile seemed to tighten ever so slightly. A few minutes later, one of Vanessa's assistants appeared and immediately drew Michael into another conversation. He looked reluctant, almost frustrated, but he allowed himself to be led away. The encounter lasted less than a minute, yet it left me wondering why such a simple greeting had seemed to make people uncomfortable. Later in the evening, while guests gathered for speeches, I stepped into a quieter hallway outside the ballroom. I needed a moment away from the noise. As I stood there, I heard footsteps approaching behind me. It was Michael. This time he looked determined. Without saying much, he handed me a large sealed envelope. His hand trembled slightly. "I have been trying to reach you for months," he said. My heart skipped a beat. "What is this?" I asked. Michael glanced toward the ballroom doors before answering. "Something you need to see." I looked down at the envelope. It felt surprisingly heavy. "Can this wait until tomorrow?" I asked. His expression grew even more serious. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said softly, "I do not think it should." Before I could ask another question, someone called his name from inside the ballroom. Michael stepped away, leaving me alone in the hallway with the envelope in my hands. As I stared at it, a strange sense of dread washed over me. Deep down, I knew that whatever was inside had the power to change everything I thought I knew about the Foundation, about my family, and about Vanessa. For several seconds, I simply stood there staring at the envelope in my hands. The sounds of laughter and conversation drifted from the ballroom behind me, but they felt strangely distant. Part of me wanted to place the envelope in my purse and wait until morning. Another part of me knew I would not be able to sleep without knowing what Michael thought was so important. I found a quiet sitting area near the entrance of the building where only a few guests occasionally passed by. Taking a slow breath, I broke the seal and pulled out the contents. The envelope was filled with documents. There were financial statements, internal reports, transaction summaries, and copies of emails. At first glance, none of it made much sense. The pages were covered with numbers, account codes, and project names. I had spent decades helping lead a charitable organization, but I was not an accountant. Still, certain details immediately caught my attention. Several large donations from longtime benefactors appeared to have been redirected into projects I did not recognize. One transaction involved nearly $2 million. Another showed more than $1 million allocated to a consulting initiative with an unfamiliar company name. I frowned as I continued reading. The further I went, the more unusual the documents became. Some projects existed only on paper. There were descriptions, projected budgets, and approval signatures, but little evidence that actual charitable work had been completed. My pulse quickened. Surely there had to be an explanation. Large organizations often hired outside consultants. New programs were launched every year. Perhaps I was simply unfamiliar with recent operations after stepping away from daily involvement. Then I noticed a name. Vanessa Whitmore. Her signature appeared on several approval forms. I turned another page. There it was again. And again. By itself, that was not alarming. Vanessa held a leadership role within the foundation. She approved many projects. But what troubled me was how consistently her name appeared on transactions involving these unfamiliar programs. The pattern was impossible to ignore. I continued reviewing the documents as carefully as I could. One report highlighted payments made to consulting firms over the previous 18 months. Several firms shared mailing addresses. Others had no clear history of charitable work. One company appeared to have been established only months before receiving a substantial contract. A chill ran through me. Michael would never have risked his reputation over minor bookkeeping disagreements. If he had assembled all of this information, he must have believed something was seriously wrong. Still, I refused to rush to judgment. Vanessa was family. She had been married to my son for years. I remembered holidays together, birthdays, and countless conversations about the future of the foundation. The idea that she could intentionally misuse the organization felt almost impossible to accept. I needed facts, not assumptions. As I reached the bottom of the stack, I found a final document clipped separately from the rest. Unlike the financial summaries, this was a recent authorization form. The amount listed at the top immediately caught my eye. $3.8 million. The funds had been approved only weeks before the gala. According to the paperwork, the money was designated for a strategic development initiative. Yet the supporting documents attached to the transaction were surprisingly thin. There was no detailed project description, no measurable objectives, no explanation of how the funds would benefit the foundation's mission. Most disturbing of all was the approval signature. Vanessa's name appeared prominently at the bottom. I read the document twice, then a third time. The ballroom doors opened nearby, and guests began moving toward the next portion of the evening's program. I barely noticed them. My attention remained fixed on the papers in my lap. For the first time that night, I realized this situation might be far more serious than a few missing scholarship programs or forgotten acknowledgments. If these documents were accurate, someone had questions to answer. And the person whose name appeared over and over again was the very woman currently standing at the center of the foundation's spotlight. As I carefully returned the papers to the envelope, one thought refused to leave my mind. What if Michael had shown me only the beginning of the story? The gala ended, but the questions followed me home. Long after midnight, I sat alone in the library of the Whitmore estate with Michael's envelope spread across the desk. The grandfather clock ticked steadily as I reviewed every page again. I wanted to find a simple explanation. I wanted to discover that the documents had been misunderstood or taken out of context. Instead, the more carefully I examined them, the more concerned I became. By sunrise, I had reached one conclusion. I could not investigate this alone. The following week, I began making quiet phone calls. I contacted people who had known the foundation since its earliest days, individuals whose loyalty had always been to the mission rather than to any particular leader. Some had retired years earlier. Others still served in advisory roles. One by one, they agreed to meet with me privately. What surprised me most was how many of them seemed relieved that I had reached out. Several admitted they had noticed unusual changes over the past 2 years. A former board member told me that important decisions were increasingly being made without full discussion. Another described meetings where financial questions were postponed repeatedly and never fully answered. None of them had proof of wrongdoing, but all of them shared the same uneasy feeling. Something about the foundation no longer felt transparent. During one meeting at a small coffee shop in Hartford, an elderly donor named Richard leaned forward and lowered his voice. He had contributed to the foundation for more than 20 years. "Eleanor," he said, "I stopped recognizing some of the reports I was receiving. The numbers looked impressive, but the details were becoming harder to verify." His words echoed concerns I had already begun hearing from others. Yet uncertainty was not enough. I needed facts. That was when I contacted David Reynolds, the Whitmore family's longtime attorney. David had worked with Robert and me for decades. He understood the foundation's structure better than almost anyone. After reviewing the documents Michael provided, David agreed to conduct a preliminary examination. Several days later, we met in his office. I could tell immediately from his expression that he had discovered something significant. He placed a folder on the table between us. There are inconsistencies, he said carefully. My stomach tightened. David explained that some authorization records appeared unusual. Certain major expenditures had been approved through procedures that did not match the foundation's established governance policies. In several cases, documentation suggested that board approval had occurred, yet meeting records showed no evidence of formal votes taking place. I stared at him in disbelief. Are you saying the records were inaccurate? I asked. David chose his words cautiously. I am saying there are serious discrepancies that deserve further investigation. Over the next few weeks, additional information emerged. Internal communications revealed that several experienced staff members had quietly left the organization after raising concerns about oversight practices. Financial reports contained references to projects that lacked supporting documentation. Most troubling of all, many of the questionable decisions seemed connected to a small circle of individuals operating under Vanessa's leadership. Still, I resisted drawing final conclusions. Vanessa's name appeared frequently, but appearances alone did not prove intent. There could be explanations I had not yet heard. There could be information missing from the records. Family loyalty made it difficult to accept any other possibility. Then David showed me a set of documents that changed everything. They involved multiple approvals executed under the authority of the board. Yet according to attendance records, several board members whose support was supposedly documented had never participated in those decisions. One member had even been traveling overseas during the meeting in question. Silence filled the room as I reviewed the evidence. Finally, I looked up at David. How serious is this? I asked. He hesitated before answering. Eleanor, if these findings continue in the direction they appear to be heading, this could become a formal legal matter. For a moment, I could not speak. The foundation Robert and I had spent 40 years building suddenly felt fragile in a way I had never imagined. And for the first time since opening Michael's envelope, I realized that the truth might be far bigger than missing programs, forgotten recognition, or questionable paperwork. Someone had been operating behind a curtain for a very long time. The only question now was how much damage would be uncovered when that curtain was finally pulled back. In the weeks that followed, I found myself confronting a reality that was even more painful than the financial questions David had uncovered. Numbers could be audited. Records could be reviewed. Policies could be corrected. But what I discovered next involved something far more personal. It involved memory, legacy, and the deliberate reshaping of history. One afternoon, while reviewing archived foundation materials with a longtime staff member, I noticed a series of promotional videos that had been produced during the past 2 years. At first, they seemed harmless enough. They highlighted successful fundraising campaigns, community outreach programs, and scholarship recipients whose lives had been changed through the foundation's support. Yet as I watched them more closely, a disturbing pattern emerged. Robert's name appeared occasionally. Mine almost never did. I asked the staff member whether older historical footage had been available during production. She seemed uncomfortable before quietly admitting that extensive archival material existed. In fact, there were thousands of photographs, speeches, interviews, and records documenting the foundation's early years. Yet very little of that material had been included in recent presentations. Curious and increasingly uneasy, I requested access to the Foundation's internal media archive. What I found left me speechless. Entire sections of the organization's history had been rewritten. Descriptions that once credited Robert and me as co-founders had been revised to emphasize more recent leadership. Timelines that previously highlighted decades of community development now focused heavily on initiatives introduced during Vanessa's tenure. Even more troubling, several official biographies distributed to donors described Vanessa as the driving force behind the foundation's transformation while barely acknowledging the people who had spent 40 years building it. I sat silently at my desk for nearly an hour after reading those materials. The financial concerns were serious, but this felt different. This felt intentional. Someone had not merely neglected the past. Someone had systematically minimized it. Determined to understand how far these changes extended, I continued digging. David helped obtain additional records from internal communications. Most of the messages were routine. Staff discussing events, marketing teams planning campaigns, development officers coordinating donor outreach. Then one evening, I came across an email thread that made my heart sink. The The message was part of a discussion regarding a new donor presentation. One employee had suggested including a larger section recognizing the foundation's original founders. The response that followed appeared to come from Vanessa herself. I read the sentence several times, hoping I had misunderstood it. I had not. The message stated, "People respond better when they see Vanessa as the true founder of the foundation's modern success story." My hands trembled as I lowered the document. It was not merely a marketing decision. It was an acknowledgement that public perception was being deliberately shaped. The goal was not to honor the organization's history. The goal was to replace it. Suddenly, dozens of experiences from the previous year began making sense. The delayed gala invitation, the missing scholarship programs, the promotional banners featuring Vanessa's image, the way donors and board members increasingly associated the foundation's accomplishments with her alone. None of it had happened by accident. A narrative had been carefully constructed over time, and I had been gradually erased from it. The realization hurt more than I expected. I had never sought public attention. Recognition was never the reason Robert and I created the foundation. We cared about helping people, not collecting applause. Yet seeing our life's work rewritten for someone else's benefit felt like a betrayal of everything we had built together. That evening, I met with David once again. After reviewing the latest documents, he remained silent for several moments. Finally, he closed the folder and looked directly at me. "Eleanor," he said carefully, "what we are seeing is no longer limited to governance concerns. This appears to be a coordinated effort to control both the foundation's finances and its history." His words settled heavily over the room. For months, I had hoped each new discovery would provide innocent explanations. Instead, every answer seemed to uncover an even deeper problem. And as I left David's office that night, carrying a growing collection of evidence, I realized something else. If the truth was ever going to come to light, it would require more than private conversations and quiet investigations. Eventually, everything would have to be brought into the open. Once I accepted that the truth would eventually have to become public, my focus shifted from discovery to preparation. Exposing a problem without undeniable evidence would only create confusion, and confusion would give Vanessa an opportunity to dismiss everything as rumor or misunderstanding. If the foundation was going to survive, the facts needed to be organized carefully, professionally, and beyond dispute. Over the following months, David and I worked quietly alongside a small group of trusted allies. Michael continued helping us understand the financial records. Several former board members agreed to review historical documents. Longtime donors provided correspondence and archived reports that helped establish a clear timeline of changes within the organization. Piece by piece, the picture became impossible to ignore. Every new document reinforced what earlier evidence had already suggested. Questionable approvals, missing oversight procedures, altered historical narratives, and projects that lacked proper accountability all pointed in the same direction. Yet despite everything we uncovered, I never felt satisfaction. I felt sadness. This was not a battle against a stranger. Vanessa was part of my family. I often found myself remembering happier years, when she first joined our family and seemed genuinely excited about continuing the foundation's mission. I wondered when ambition had begun replacing stewardship. I wondered whether Robert would have recognized the warning signs earlier than I had. But dwelling on those questions would not protect the organization. Action would. As preparations continued, an unexpected opportunity emerged. The Foundation's next annual charity gala was approaching. It would be the largest event of the year, attended by donors, board members, community leaders, scholarship recipients, and members of the press. More importantly, Vanessa had spent months planning a major presentation designed to celebrate what she described as a new era of leadership. According to internal communications we reviewed, she was expected to receive a prestigious recognition award during the evening. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. The same event where she intended to solidify her public reputation could also become the moment when the truth finally surfaced. David initially cautioned against moving too quickly. He wanted every document verified and every legal concern addressed. I agreed. The goal was not humiliation. The goal was accountability. Fortunately, as the gala approached, more individuals quietly came forward. Some were current staff members. Others had left the foundation months earlier. Several shared experiences that matched concerns already documented in our investigation. Their testimonies strengthened the evidence considerably. Meanwhile, word of the ongoing review began circulating among a handful of senior board members. Unlike earlier months, when questions had been brushed aside, attitudes were changing. People were beginning to realize that the concerns were serious. One evening, I attended a private meeting with several founding board members. Many had known Robert for decades. After reviewing the compiled evidence, the room fell silent. Finally, Harold Bennett, the same board member who had spoken to me at the previous gala, leaned back in his chair and sighed heavily. Robert would be heartbroken, he said. No one disagreed. By the end of the meeting, a plan had been established. The board leadership would review the findings immediately before the upcoming gala. If the evidence remained consistent, a formal presentation would be prepared. Everything would be documented. Everything would be supported. Everything would be transparent. As the date of the gala drew closer, I noticed a striking contrast. Vanessa appeared more confident than ever. Her photographs filled promotional materials. Interviews praised her vision. Invitations highlighted the evening's special recognition ceremony. To the outside world, her position seemed stronger than it had ever been. Yet hidden beneath that polished image was a growing collection of facts that could no longer be ignored. On the morning of the gala, David called me with a final update. The last independent review had been completed. The findings matched everything we had already discovered. There would be no more delays. There would be no more waiting. That evening, hundreds of guests would gather beneath the crystal chandeliers once again. Vanessa believed she was about to receive the greatest honor of her career. What she did not know was that the same stage prepared for celebration was about to become the place where years of carefully hidden truths would finally come into the light. The ballroom looked even more magnificent than it had the year before. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the historic hall. Waitstaff moved gracefully between elegantly decorated tables, and hundreds of guests filled the room with conversation and anticipation. As I entered, I immediately noticed the difference from the previous gala. This time, more people approached me. Some offered warm smiles. Others shook my hand and thanked me for attending. Word of the board's internal review had not become public, but subtle changes were already taking place. People who had once seemed eager to overlook the foundation's past now appeared interested in acknowledging it again. Across the room, Vanessa stood at the center of attention. She wore a confident smile and moved easily from one conversation to the next. Photographers followed her. Donors greeted her enthusiastically. To anyone observing from the outside, she appeared to be enjoying the most successful evening of her career. As the event progressed, speeches celebrated community achievements. Scholarship recipients shared their stories, and fundraising milestones were announced. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Yet beneath the polished surface, a very different conversation was unfolding behind closed doors. Earlier that afternoon, senior board members had completed their final review of the evidence. The findings were unanimous. The documentation was substantial. The concerns could no longer be ignored. Shortly before the evening's award presentation, Harold Bennett approached me. His expression was calm but determined. "It is time," he said quietly. I nodded. Surprisingly, I felt no anger. Months earlier, I might have approached this moment differently. But after everything that had happened, my goal was not revenge. My goal was to protect the foundation and honor the legacy Robert and I had built. Soon afterward, guests returned to their seats as the evening's most anticipated segment began. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone. He spoke about generosity, community service, and the importance of leadership. Then he announced that the board chairman would offer special remarks before the recognition awards were presented. A ripple of curiosity moved through the audience. This was not listed in the printed program. Harold walked slowly to the podium. The room became quiet. He thanked the guests for their support and reflected on the foundation's history. Then he said something that immediately changed the atmosphere. "Before we celebrate the future," he said, "we must first recognize the people whose dedication created the opportunities we enjoy today." Large screens beside the stage suddenly displayed photographs from decades earlier. Images of Robert and me appeared. There were photographs from fundraising drives, scholarship ceremonies, community projects, and countless events spanning 40 years. Guests watched attentively as scenes from the foundation's earliest days filled the screens. I could feel emotion building throughout the room. Many younger attendees had never seen those images before. Harold then invited me to join him on stage. For a brief moment, I hesitated. Then I stood and walked forward. The audience responded with warm applause. As I reached the podium, I glanced across the room. Vanessa remained seated, her smile noticeably strained. I began speaking softly. I shared stories about the Foundation's humble beginnings, Robert's commitment to service, and the thousands of lives that had been touched through community support. The audience listened carefully. Then I addressed something more difficult. Without accusations or personal attacks, I explained that recent reviews had uncovered serious concerns regarding governance practices, financial oversight, and historical records. The room became completely silent. Behind me, the screens displayed documents, timelines, meeting records, and archive materials supporting the board's findings. Every fact had been verified. Every statement had been documented. There was no speculation, only evidence. Then one particular email appeared on the screen. It contained the message suggesting that public materials should portray Vanessa as the true architect of the Foundation's success. Audible murmurs spread throughout the ballroom. Faces turned toward the screens. Others looked toward Vanessa. For the first time all evening, she appeared genuinely shocked. The confidence that had carried her through the night seemed to vanish. Yet the presentation was only beginning. Because as more documents appeared and additional findings were revealed, everyone in the room was about to discover just how extensive the truth really was. For several long seconds after the final document appeared on the screens, the ballroom remained completely silent. It was the kind of silence that only happens when an entire room realizes it has witnessed something unexpected. The presentation concluded not with accusations, but with facts. Every document had been verified. Every timeline had been reviewed. Every concern had been examined by independent professionals and senior board members. No dramatic speech was necessary. The evidence spoke for itself. As I stepped away from the podium, conversations immediately began spreading throughout the room. Donors who had arrived expecting a celebration now gathered in small groups, discussing what they had just seen. Board members exchanged concerned looks. Several community leaders requested copies of the findings. The atmosphere had changed entirely. Earlier that evening, Vanessa had been surrounded by admirers. Now, something remarkable was happening. People were no longer moving toward her. They were moving away. It was not because anyone instructed them to do so. It was because uncertainty had replaced confidence. Individuals who had spent years praising her leadership suddenly seemed reluctant to be associated with the controversy unfolding before them. Vanessa remained seated for several moments, staring toward the stage. Eventually, she stood and attempted to speak with several guests nearby. Most responded politely, but the conversations were brief. Others quickly turned their attention elsewhere. The contrast was impossible to ignore. At the previous gala, I had experienced what it felt like to become invisible. Now the same phenomenon appeared to be happening to the woman who had once occupied the center of every conversation. Meanwhile, board leadership moved quickly. Harold Bennett and several senior members announced that an independent audit would begin immediately. They emphasized that the Foundation's mission remained strong and that transparency would guide every step moving forward. Their calm and professional response reassured many guests. Instead of panic, a sense of determination began spreading through the room. People wanted answers, but they also wanted the organization to succeed. Then something happened that I will never forget. One of the Foundation's largest donors approached me. He had contributed millions of dollars over the years and held significant influence within charitable circles across Connecticut. Taking my hand, he looked me directly in the eye. "Eleanor," he said, "I should have paid closer attention sooner." Before I could respond, several other donors joined us. One after another, they expressed support for the Foundation's original mission. Some shared memories of Robert. Others recalled community projects they had helped fund decades earlier. The conversation grew larger and larger until a small crowd had formed around me. Across the ballroom, Vanessa stood alone. No one was openly hostile toward her. No one raised their voice. Yet the difference was unmistakable. The same room that had once revolved around her attention now focused almost entirely elsewhere. In that moment, I finally understood the meaning of accountability. It was not public embarrassment. It was the natural consequence of trust being broken. People invest their confidence carefully. Once that confidence is damaged, rebuilding it becomes extraordinarily difficult. As the evening continued, additional announcements followed. Several major donors pledged continued support for scholarship programs that had been neglected. Former board members volunteered to assist with organizational reforms. Community leaders offered resources to strengthen oversight procedures. What could have become a night of chaos instead became the beginning of renewal. Yet the most surprising development came near the end of the event. Another longtime donor quietly informed board leadership that he possessed additional records connected to some of the projects under review. The information had never been shared publicly before. According to him, those records might reveal even more about how certain decisions had been made behind closed doors. As guests slowly began leaving the ballroom, that revelation lingered in everyone's mind. The truth already seemed significant. But if additional evidence existed, then the story might not be over yet. In fact, it was becoming increasingly clear that the full scope of what had happened inside the foundation was only beginning to emerge. The months that followed marked the most significant period of change in the foundation's history. The independent audit moved forward exactly as promised. Every transaction was reviewed. Every approval process was examined. Every concern raised during the investigation received careful attention. As additional records were analyzed, many of the questions that had troubled board members and donors were finally answered. The findings confirmed that numerous governance procedures had not been properly followed and that important decisions had been concentrated within a very small group of individuals. In response, the board implemented sweeping reforms designed to restore transparency and accountability. New oversight policies were established. Independent reviews became mandatory for major expenditures. Historical archives were restored and preserved. Most importantly, the foundation recommitted itself to the mission Robert and I had envisioned decades earlier. Vanessa's role within the organization came to an end. The board concluded that new leadership would be necessary moving forward. Although the decision attracted considerable attention within charitable circles, the foundation's supporters largely focused on the future rather than the controversy. People wanted the organization to succeed. They wanted scholarships funded, families supported, and community programs strengthened. In many ways, the foundation's mission proved stronger than any one individual. Throughout that year, I spent countless hours working alongside board members, staff, and donors to help rebuild trust. To my surprise, I found renewed purpose in the process. For a long time after Robert's passing, I had believed my most meaningful contributions were behind me. Yet now I found myself helping guide the organization through one of the most important transitions in its history. Donors who had temporarily paused contributions returned with renewed confidence. Several scholarship programs that had quietly disappeared were fully restored. New community partnerships emerged. Volunteers stepped forward in greater numbers than anyone expected. The foundation was not merely recovering. It was growing stronger. 1 year later, the next charity gala arrived. The event was held on a beautiful summer evening beneath sparkling lights and towering oak trees surrounding the newly renovated Whitmore Community Hall. As I approached the entrance, I paused for a moment to take in the scene. Families gathered across the grounds. Scholarship recipients shared stories with donors. Volunteers laughed together at long tables decorated with flowers. Everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of the mission Robert and I had started so many years earlier. Then I noticed something that brought tears to my eyes. Above the entrance stood a bronze plaque unveiled earlier that afternoon. The inscription read, "Eleanor and Robert Whitmore Community Hall." I had never asked for such recognition. In truth, I would have been perfectly happy without it. Yet seeing our names together again felt like a reminder that history, when protected by truth, has a way of enduring. As I entered the hall, the guests rose to their feet. The applause began softly before growing louder and louder until it filled the room. Many of the people standing there had known us for decades. Others were students whose scholarships had changed the course of their lives. Some were volunteers. Some were donors. All of them represented the community we had worked to serve. When the applause finally settled, I was invited to speak. I looked around the room and saw faces filled not with admiration for me personally, but with belief in the mission we shared. That distinction mattered. Smiling gently, I stepped to the microphone. "A legacy is not built by being seen," I said. "It is built by serving others when nobody is watching." The room grew quiet. In that moment, I realized something important. The greatest victory had never been restoring my reputation. It had never been proving anyone wrong. The greatest victory was ensuring that the foundation's purpose survived, protected by truth rather than appearances. As the evening continued beneath the warm summer sky, I felt a sense of peace I had not experienced in years. Robert's legacy had been honored. The foundation's future was secure, and the community we loved would continue benefiting from the work that had started with a simple dream so many years ago. Sometimes the truth takes time to emerge, but when it finally does, it has a remarkable way of putting everything back where it belongs.